Greetings, programs, and welcome to the latest edition of the Awesome Friday podcast. The podcast will review two new things every week. My name is Matthew, and with me, as always, is Simon. Say hello, Simon.
Hello. I just enjoy that you're in full Barry White mode today. Like your already low voice has now sunk a further 3 octaves to be real sexy. Like, welcome to Awesome Friday. That's my sexy voice. We're gonna talk about
happens.
2 movies. Oh yeah.
Well, turns out that's what happens when I get sick with not COVID for the 10th time during this pandemic. This is going to sound weird and morbid, but I took my 3rd COVID test in 3 days this morning, and I'm just kind of part of me is disappointed it's not COVID at this point. I keep testing negative, and I've tested negative. I've never once tested positive for COVID during this whole pandemic. And I know this is awful, but I've managed to have bronchitis, several seasonal colds, actual influenza, 3 sinus infections, but not COVID. At this point, I just want to get it over with.
In the last 2 years, you've been the sickest out of anyone I know, and none of it's been COVID, including the people I know with COVID. It just seems to be a constant. You just need to stop mixing with the general public. Unfortunately, you are cursed to do that, it would seem. But
part of it is that my current doctor thinks that the sinus infection might actually be a chronic infection, so I'm getting some diagnostics for that. But
ooh,
yeah,
that sounds fun. That sounds fun and pain-free.
No, it's just frustrating as hell.
So anyway, welcome to the Awesome Friday Health Podcast. Where 2 old guys moan about how much they ache and how sick they are.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, either I'm sick or you're tired. That's how we start every episode.
Do you know what I've already noticed? Now, I had a really busy day Thursday, and I basically, part of my job is doing Zoom tutorials and presentations, and I was basically on Zoom for 6 hours in one day, jumping between stuff. And I sit on a really, really comfy chair. We both have really nice, PC chairs with big high backs and lumbar support. But I was in that position pretty much all day. And when I got up, I couldn't actually straighten my back, the small of my back. I am frozen. I am now frozen in the seated position. And I'm like, well, that's it then. I guess that's my life now, is having to go for a walk and hobbling down the street like an old man because I've been sat comfortably for a few hours.
These are the trials and tribulations of being a middle-aged white dude.
Do you know what I really want to find out from you, which you can tell me later, is how to turn off the Apple the Apple Watch functionality, where every hour it goes, hey, you should probably stand up and maybe move your body right now. You should be more active. Your body, your circulatory system needs some movement. So I need to turn that off because I'm starting to shout at my phone. My watch yesterday, when I was really stressed, went, hey, would you like to have a mindful moment? I'm like, no, I would not like to fucking have a mindful moment. Go away. So I need to kill
the funny thing is that probably would have been the perfect moment to have a mindful moment.
Well, I think it probably tells from your escalating blood levels or whatever it reads from being close to your skin. It knows, doesn't it? It absolutely knows. Very similarly, yes. This does link us to one of our movies we're talking about today. The very subtle, I've detected your blood is elevated. One of our movies does have that as a theme as well. It's quite creepy. And the new Apple Watch is even creepier. The Watch Ultra or whatever it's called, that basically scans your entire body every 5 seconds and tells you if you're having a heart attack and all these things. It's amazing and also a little bit creepy.
I mean, that describes most personal tech these days. It's not a new... Just even the current Apple Watch is amazing, but a little bit creepy. They're all that. Yeah. And the way they do it is by intruding into your personal life and collecting all your data. So,
yay. And we welcome them in with open arms.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people talking about, data intrusions and how much we give away. And I think at this point, it's upsetting, but you just have to pick which company you're going to trust the most and go with that one. Mm-hmm. And because that's the world we currently live in, and we do have to live in it. Mm-hmm. And It's definitely possible to extricate yourself from it all, but then you are extricated from the world. So, I mean,
Especially the
and
kind
I
of
like
jobs
and I
like
like
we're
live in
both.
the world. So yeah.
And in terms of a big part of my life for the last 5 or 6 years is looking for freelance writing opportunities. Like if you're not in certain online circles, you just don't hear about them, and you need to
Mhm.
be part of an ecosystem in order to hear that information. So I quit Twitter for a while, and I suddenly realized I don't know where to find freelance writing opportunities because they all just come up on Twitter. So yeah, it's a balance. It's a deal with the devil, isn't it, on many levels?
Yeah,
But hey,
it really is.
and
Well,
that does link us to one of our movies today.
it does. So we're talking about two movies, like we are wont to do. One of which is coming up next, and the other one is one of the best films of the year, maybe. So let's talk about the one that's not one of the best films of the year first. Now that we've bantered suitably, Simon, since you clearly liked this movie more than me, why don't you give us a quick rundown on this indie film called Blank?
Um, yeah,
Or
let's
should I just
define
do it?
like. No. So Blank is a writer. A writer is struggling. She has written many successful novels, and she can't get the latest one out. And she lives in a unstated near future where she like dictates to a like a projection on the wall, and she gets notifications for this retreat. It's called The Retreat, which is an AI driven, quiet area where you can go and be away from the world, kept in silence, kept in luxury, looked after by a holographic AI, like butler, if you like, and a physical robot who will do all your chores for you. So all you need to do is write and drink wine. And so because she's at the end of her tether, as we see in the opening, the very subtle opening sequence, which reveals that she is a struggling writer. We There is a bin full of crumpled up paper, all of them blank, which tells us that she's out of ideas, and she heads to the retreat after the insistence of her agent, and she goes to the. It's basically this big old brick building that has sealed doors and windows for silence, and has a robot companion that this like 50s housewife styled robot called Rita, who will look after her every needs. Um, and she goes there and she goes for a run every day, and then something goes wrong. There's like a never really identified what it is, but a virus disrupts the AI, and she can't leave the building anymore. So it turns into a bottle movie with a little bit of misery thrown in. And that's the general plot without giving any spoilers away, really.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's basically clearly the person who wrote this has seen both Black Mirror and Misery,
Hmm.
would be the way to put it. And let me just start out by saying that it is, for better or for worse, it is a very indie movie. I think
Hmm.
is probably the way to put this. It is full of interesting ideas that aren't necessarily executed very well. And I have a very hard time. I'm having a very hard time talking about this film. I think Simon, you're probably gonna have an easier time because you're much more willing to just say this was bad than I
I
am.
I mean I execution is everything. When you are clearly on a short budget, and the way you execute your idea, the things you can control are your script and your camera work and your editing and your performance. Like these are all the things that are the only things really that are in your direct control when you make what is clearly an indie movie with a limited budget. And the problem, this movie is called Blank, by the way. I'm not sure we even mentioned the title yet, but the biggest problem is that the idea is sound, and we've seen this idea before, but as I said a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Fall, a bottle movie lives and dies by how the protagonists think their way out of a seemingly hopeless situation. And the problem with Blank is that it not only isn't interesting, it makes a couple of capital C choices that are not satisfying at all in the exploration of how this woman gets out of this enclosed situation. The whole thing is made without subtlety. It treats the audience as unable to comprehend even the slightest bit of subtext or hints. Everything is from the first scene is given to you directly in front of your face. And do you know what it really reminds me of is I taught film for a long, long time and drama, and it felt like a very well-meaning first year film project where the teacher then goes, okay, these are your good ideas, but I want to look at your execution because you've got to dial all of this down and
Mm-hmm.
cut these bits out and focus on this is your good idea and this is your not good idea. Your not good idea is destroying your good idea by distracting us from it. This is how you have to treat the audience. Like the audience has to be treated like I think Knives Out did this very, very well, and I'm really looking forward to Glass Onion because Ryan Johnson really knows how to drip feed interesting things to an audience and make them think. He does that with all of his movies, and
Mm-hmm.
this movie does not demand that you think or analyze anything. Like it, I've watched Garth Marenghi's Dark Place from all of it in the last couple of weeks, which is a comedy show that's meant to be set in the 80s in this like haunted Twilight Zone hospital, and it's written by this stealth style Stephen King wannabe writer, and his scripts have no subtlety either. And this felt like a Dark Place script because the opening scene is massive, unsubtle images of this struggling writer not being able to write. And then she gets a message, come to the retreat, which she cancels, dismisses it, and then immediately gets a phone call from her agent, basically saying, I'm really worried. You should go to a retreat or something. It's the whole film is that level of unsubtle. And then she plays chess later, just before she's trapped, and tries to play chess with a holographic dude who's like her assistant. And he beats her over and over. And she looks at the board and goes, I think I'm trapped here. And then it
Yeah.
holds her. It's like, Jesus, like,
You know, my
this
my
needed
personal
3 or 4 rewrites.
my personal favorite one of those is there's a moment where there's clearly like there's a malware is detected in the system, and then she goes to the TV and turns on the TV, and it happens to be a news report about how malware affects software. Like, if you have malware already, it's difficult to
Yes.
get rid of. Like, yeah,
Yes.
no shit. It's 2022. We all have computers. We know how this shit works. I mean, to be fair, I've worked in retail customer service of fixing computers for a long time, so not everybody knows this. But like, that is
Yeah.
how like that's definitely a thing I didn't need to be told.
No, there's so
And
much in this movie you don't need to be told.
I feel really bad because like I think about this sometimes when I watch indie movies because when we talk about something like the movie we're going to talk about next is a fair example, but like any blockbuster, like we talked about when we talked about She-Hulk, when we talked about any big budget thing, like they don't need us, right? Like they don't like what we say is not going to affect whether that film makes
Mhm.
money or does well or the people in it advance or anything like that. But an indie movie like this definitely like they do need us, right? Like what we say can actually have an impact. And I sort of hate that I have to say that I didn't really like this movie. And I do always try. I think it's the responsibility of anyone who's critiquing work to approach a film and say like, look, I didn't like this, but here are some things that I did like, which is what I'm about to do. But I just hate that that's the compromise I have to make. I wish I liked this
Mhm.
movie because the ideas are so solid,
Mhm.
and I feel like it's like 2 drafts away from being
Oh,
probably
totally.
great.
Well,
I
good,
actually
maybe
thought that
good.
the no, I think it probably could have been great. Like it's in the realm. I thought that the two main actresses were good. I particularly liked Haida Reid, who plays Rita the robot. I thought she
Mhm.
did a really good job of being uh, interestingly robotic, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
Not quite robotic, but not quite human. She managed to like toe that line really, really well. I thought she did a really good job of delivering. There's a lot of repeated dialogue from her that I thought was repeated really well. Like, not the words are verbatim and the delivery is nearly verbatim in really interesting ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, um, but ultimately, like, I think the word for this movie is unsubtle, and
Mhm.
it takes away from everything.
It
And
really does.
it's just tough, right? Like, I really want to like this movie. I really want to,
Mhm.
but I don't, and it's a problem.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. When I saw the trailer, I was very enthusiastic to watch this film. I love bottle movies. The I love watching someone trapped go through the measures and the trauma of getting out of there and revealing about themselves as well. And there is a revelation in this as well. Can we talk about the narrative decision in the second half? It is a fair spoiler, but it does form a pretty large chunk of what didn't work in this film for me.
Well, I think you're talking about this film is set in two time periods, and it's sort of unclear as to what one of the time periods is for about the first half of the movie until it sort of becomes clear in the second half, and it doesn't really. These flashback sequences don't really work.
No,
Not really.
and
It's
it's meant.
almost too much of a parallel between what she's going through in the present and what she went through in the past. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of the
Again,
exact
it's so
same situation. It's like,
yeah.
uh, it's again, it's subtle like a sledgehammer.
And
It's
also
not.
these extended flashbacks really take us out of the moment of her being trapped. Like, it removes
Yeah.
us as an audience. Again, if we go back to Fall, it kept us at the top of that pole with the girls, so we're trapped up there with them, and we needed to be in this building, in this, ultimately this room, with the main character here, who played by Rachel Shelley, who I thought was fine as well. I enjoyed her performance. We
Hmm.
needed to see uh, how more traumatic it was for her, because she was running out of food. Every time Rita the robot reset, she does this introductory greeting where she says, "I'm with you for 30 days." So every time she reset after she malfunctioned, it reset the 30 days, and the food is running out, the wine, the water's running out. And so Claire is the main character is increasingly desperate because Rita has no comprehension that she's going to die in here. And just when that becomes, that Vice tightens, we are taken out to this flashback that is so idiosyncratic in terms of the costumes and the set decoration. And it is so unclear which time period it's meant to be. It doesn't work at all. And for me, if I was doing another pass on this movie, I would remove all that. Do you know the part I really liked actually is that Rita reads through the robot, reads through the book she's writing, and starts acting out the horrific mother parts.
Hmm.
And you could have kept that in, because you'd learn exactly the same from what it turns out. What Claire is writing is about the traumatic experience she had with her own mother. We would have got that by Rita reading it and then acting out the ghost of her mother while she's trapped in this room. So it becomes more and more desperate. We didn't need to see any of the flashbacks.
No.
And I would have changed the ending completely, but I think I'll save that for off air, because that is a pretty major spoiler. But you're right,
I
it
mean, yeah,
needed
that
a
may
major pass.
without talking about it, yeah, the ending is pretty unsatisfying for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's some, and there's all, yeah. I'm sort of like, my feelings are all jumbled up, but like, for every good thing in this movie, there's something that is a little bit frustrating. So, for example, there is a sequence in the latter half anyway where it's like one big long take that's meant to be a montage through the passing of several days. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
and it's one big long continuous take with multiple repositions on set and moving props around and actors changing costume. And I thought that was really well executed,
Yeah.
especially given the budgetary limitations they're obviously dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, Wayne Brady's in this, and to be fair, he's pretty good. He's fine, and he plays a hologram. And I'd really love to know how they filmed his part, because at no point does his eye line ever line up with who he's talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Like at any moment, he's talking to Claire or even like looking at Rita. It never quite lines up, and it's really
Mm,
frustrating.
mm,
Even the first time you see him on screen, he's on a computer screen, like advertising this retreat, and his eye line isn't straight ahead from the computer screen; it's off to one side. It
yeah.
doesn't like, and none of it. It just feels like I. It just feels like they needed someone on set to be like, "This is where he's looking." And
Hmm.
I guess that probably the issue is that they. My guess is that they filmed him separately
Oh, totally. There was
because
a separate LA production crew in parallel with the main one.
yeah, and I get the impression that the reason for that is that it was probably just too expensive to have someone on set that they could then like digitally affect into being a hologram,
Hmm.
or even just someone in a green gimp suit or whatever. But it just I found it really distracting, and I think I did text you because I watched it this morning that like at one point Rita exclaims that she can explains that she can detect life signs within 440 yards. And that moment, and this is the dumbest shit ever, but that moment really took me out of the film because who in 2022 writes a story set in the future and uses yards to measure anything? Like it's just dumb. It's just dumb shit like that that really took me out of the movie. And it's really a shame because again, the ideas are so good, I thought.
I do love how you're trying to dig around for the positive in this, and you're right that that single shot that shows the passing of time instead of being a montage is like a slowly rotating shot with things moving in and out was brilliantly done, and it's easily the best part of the movie in terms of effect because it's the only subtle part of the whole film,
Yeah.
and technically as well, it's really well done that one shot. And honestly, when I saw that shot, I remember thinking, "Oh, please be this like a sign that the rest of this movie is going to be like this inventive and this good." And it just actually gets worse from that point.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And like I'm sure there's something here for someone, but none of it was. I mean, other than the ideas in that one shot, it wasn't for me,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, or me. How many stars
So
are you giving it then?
I will give it two, just barely two,
I think I
and I
agree
think,
because. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and I'll give it the two based on the two lead performances and that one shot.
Yeah, I think we're absolutely on the same page here. I was thinking about one, and then I thought to myself, "Is it really as bad as Pinocchio? Like,
No,
do
it's nowhere
why
near as bad as Pinocchio.
No, like Pinocchio's bad in a different way and deserves a one. This is a two because I did like the main performances. I did like that one shot. The
I will
ideas are
say,
interesting, but just the execution was so poor.
yeah, I mean, I will say that I think a key difference here is that this does feel like a well-intentioned film that just didn't turn out very well, as opposed to Pinocchio, which feels like a banal exercise in corporate money grabbing,
Yes,
right? Like it's much easier to forgive some of the faults in this just because it is somebody cared about this, and I
at least
didn't
so.
feel like anybody cared about Pinocchio.
And this had color as well, which is an interesting concept that Disney might want to look at, especially after having seen the trailer for the Little Mermaid live action. And Little Mermaid is one of my favorite animated Disney's. The It is so bland and dark. I was going to be another Pinocchio, so that's taken the
My
wind out of my
since
sails.
I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the Little Mermaid because I don't want to have to get into talking about some of the reactions to the Little Mermaid.
Oh
But
God, yeah.
my my sincere hope for that trailer is that everything under the ocean is muted because they're under the ocean, and it becomes a burst of color once she's in the world. But I have no
No,
faith
but
in
it
that.
shouldn't be under. It's a kids' movie, right? It shouldn't be dark under the ocean. There should be color under the ocean. There is color under
Look,
the ocean.
I'm not trying to say what it should be.
Oh,
I'm just saying based on what I've seen, that's what I hope it is.
I think so. But anyway,
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah, let's
well,
definitely not get into that. But yeah, it's a two from me as well. I can't
good.
recommend anyone watches this really.
I mean, if it comes up on a streaming service, which it probably almost certainly will, I think you could probably do worse. You could watch Pinocchio.
But
But
watch
like,
out for though, because the poster for it shows like You know, remember Species with Natasha Henstridge? It's like a
Yeah.
sexy lady stripped down android looking to the camera with a red eye on, and it's all red background. Go blank. She's trapped in this place. It's nothing. Nothing. You never ever see any more robot than a little bit of metal around her eyes. Like it's not like that at all. So
Yeah, it's
it's
interesting because
not that kind of movie.
there's two posters for this movie, and the one you're describing. Sorry, there's three posters for this movie, and the one you're describing is the one that I've seen the most, and it is by far the most misleading about what the movie
Mhm.
is.
Yeah,
But there's one of them that's like Rita as a silhouette with an image of the tree in the house behind her, and that's actually uh, a good poster and
I
more
haven't seen
representative.
that. I haven't
But yeah,
seen that one.
anyway.
Okay.
Well, let's move on
Mhm.
to what might be one of the better movies of this entire year. As we're all aware, in 2016, the world lost one of our preeminent artists in David Bowie, and now uh, director Brett Morgan, famous for things like The Kid Stays in the Picture and Kurt Cobain Montage of Heck, has released or is releasing has released by the time you hear this. His documentary about David Bowie called Moonage Daydream, and spoiler alert, it is about eight kinds of wonderful. Um, I don't know how to properly describe this film other than it is an overwhelming audio, visual, spiritual experience, and you should definitely see it on the biggest screen you can find. Uh,
Uh, I
yeah,
c- well, first of all, can I just have a side note? I just want to, as a grammar teacher, I just loved your grammar changes, like describing when this film is actually coming out. Congratulations on your grammar. But
yeah,
this, do you know what this film? I've never seen anything by this director. I've never even heard of Brett Morgan, and I was. I'm not a huge fan of music documentaries, so I went into this with a little trepidation. But I was kind of expecting a narrator, and like when Bowie was 16, he went to, maybe David Attenborough. Like um,
yeah. You were expecting a
this,
more standard
yeah,
sort of
and this
documentary, and this is
this
much more
felt
of
like
an immersive experience.
the whole thing is that moment between being awake and being asleep, where your brain goes, "Oh, hey, here's while what happens when you slip into sleep. It's like color and montage and music and fading voices in and out, and it's just, I mean, it's just incredible. I've never seen anything like it. I was a Bowie fan before, and it's a very emotional movie to watch as well. um, but it doesn't really loiter on any sort of emotional aspects like with his death or anything. It doesn't have a somber tone. It's a celebration of this once in a humanity like
Yeah,
artist who was never able to stop. Even when he found massive success, his first thought was, okay, let's try something else, let's do something else. And I love how this movie took us through all the stages of Bowie's life and explained the significance of them, and the music and the culture and the setting and what he was trying to do. And it's all done through visuals and interviews with him and music. There's no overt explanations, there's no narrator telling us what to think or what to observe. It is just mind-blowingly wonderful and satisfying. Quite the
yeah.
juxtaposition from the last movie.
There isn't even any like talking heads like from anyone
Mm,
else. It's pretty much literally just David Bowie's music playing with visuals of him performing with occasional voiceovers that are or clips from interviews with him, and it's amazing how that form can convey so much.
mhm,
Um, I think the last thing I saw of Brett Morgan's was Montage of Heck, and I didn't. It's in a very similar in terms of style, but I didn't connect with it the same way I connected with this.
mhm,
Um, and that just might be that, like, not to speak ill of Kurt Cobain, but David Bowie is a little more singular, I think, than Kurt
mhm,
Cobain was. Um, if anything, like, I feel like the movie is laser focused on David Bowie, the artist, and that's not a complaint exactly. But like my one like minor like, it would have been nice to hear more about his relationship with his first wife or his son, um,
Mhm.
or anything outside. Because even like the whole first third of the movie, which covers most of the '70s and covers basically that whole Ziggy Stardust era. Um, I mean, his wife was there too, and she was instrumental in making some of like the fashion choices and the makeup choices and influencing the scene. She's not mentioned at all.
Mhm.
And Duncan Jones. I don't know what David Bowie's relationship was like with Duncan Jones with his son because the movie never mentions him at all.
Mhm.
And I can't imagine that there's no interviews where he talks about his son or his first wife. Like it's just I feel like it's I think this is a great film, and I think it's laser focused, maybe almost to a fault. But that's a really nitpicky thing for me to say. Like, it is still an amazing film. Does that make sense? Does
Mhm.
that? I feel like that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. It's interesting because you're right. Its objective is to explore Bowie's creative impulse,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
an impulse that changed every decade for sure, every year probably, and
Yeah,
the influence he had. And what is fascinating to me is that you're right. Angela Bowie was a massive influence on that whole glam rock culture of the '70s, and her role in that shouldn't be discounted. But for me, it was. I can kind of see why they made the decision to focus on him, like moving through his creation of himself
yeah,
over and over and over, recreation.
yeah.
And
I guess the way to frame it is that it isn't so much about David Bowie as it is David Bowie's creativity,
yeah,
and
oh yeah,
that's an
absolutely, yeah,
an important distinction. Yeah,
yeah. And the amazing thing as well, I mean, not that we need reminding, but it opens with obviously it goes in largely chronological order for the most part, and the the all the '70s stuff in the first third of this movie sounds utterly contemporary, like it could be released today and be considered groundbreaking. Like his I've written a lot of songs. I've been songwriting for a large part of my life, and my when I write a song and I know it's good when I can feel that I've made a good chord change. I know it sounds really wanky, but it's a feeling that I get. It's just like a instinct of, all right, this is good. It's like looking at a shot or an edit you've made. Like, yeah, this works. This is right. And I listen to his chord changes and that whole glam rock era. Like it starts with All You Young Dudes, and it goes on to obviously Life on Mars has some of the most gut wrenchingly perfect chord changes that go on and on and on, and it just brings tears to my eyes even thinking about it. And
hmm
like that music still is utterly groundbreaking and utterly amazing, and it's hard to comprehend someone sitting down and writing that. Like, where do you start by writing that? And this movie talks about there's a period later where he joins with Brian Eno and says, I don't want to write this way anymore. I don't want to write with words. I want a new language of writing, of how to write music." And it's just incredible. And it highlights again the need for freedom of creativity. I mean, he was lucky, obviously, that his early success gave him money to be creative. There's so many people who don't have the financial freedom to be creative because it's not
yeah,
rewarded in our culture, which is a whole diatribe that I'm not going to get into now. But he never really focused on making more money. He just wanted to make something that, as he said, captured the now. And the now will change like next week. But whenever he made an album, it was just to capture the now. Just absolutely fascinating to hear that and to hear his journey as he goes through all these different genres as well. I couldn't take
yeah.
my eyes
I
off it.
I really appreciated the as much as I think it's a good way to frame it is to talk about his creativity because it doesn't just focus on his music either. I was actually really struck. There's a couple of scenes where they just show him doing like interpretive dance, and I
Mhm,
found those scenes actually quite moving.
mhm,
And they talk about his time on Broadway and in film and painting. They showed a
mhm,
number of his paintings, many of which are beautiful. Um, and again, with the overlay of just his music at the same time he was doing those things is
mhm,
just super interesting. And
mhm,
if you wanted to sort of understand that creative impulse, like this would be the film to watch. Like if you were like, what is one thing I could consume in order to understand what creativity feels like? It would be this film.
mhm. No,
And to your
absolutely.
point, and to your point too about how he, his financial freedom from his early success. There's one moment in an interview later in the film where he talks about how like someone asked him like people have accused you of selling out, and he says I've never begrudged an artist for finding an audience. Like there's I don't he says he doesn't understand this idea that struggle equals purity, and I
Mhm.
really appreciated that moment
Yeah,
coming from someone
and
in his position.
the idea that he didn't want to mix in the circles, he just got rid of most of his possessions and just traveled to learn about the different cultures and tried to use that to influence his own writing. There's a couple of times where he goes to a place and he talks about his intentions for that place, and then they play the music that came out of that place, and you're like, oh my god, like how where did you find these chords and these lyrics and this song and this story? And it's just incredible to see someone, as he described himself, as a traveler. He never wanted to be in one place with lots of possessions. He wasn't interested at all in the trappings of it. He just wanted to
Hmm.
travel. And I love the moments because part of his performance character was a very like dour face, right? That we know he wasn't miserable, but he had that very kind of cool look. And there's one great moment where he goes, "I have no idea where he is, but the locals are playing like on like percussion instruments and xylophones, and they welcome him, they shake his hand, and he just sits down and he is beaming like a 10-year-old boy, just happy, happy, happy." And it's it's a wonderful peek into the kind of free artistic genius that it just flares up once in a lifetime. And who
Hmm.
knows who else is out there who is capable of this and will never find their feet or the freedom to do it. And I think that's a big part of this film as well. It's that call, it's a scream for allowing people to be creative and allowing them to be individual. There's one of my favorite moments is where he's on a very stuffy interview, probably in the 70s because he's dressed as Ziggy, and he's wearing these giant platform shoes. And the interviewer says in a suit, like, "Tell me, David, are those menswear shoes or women's shoes or bisexual shoes?" He says, "They're shoes, silly." And the audience just breaks down. And this is in the 70s, right? This is a long time before any kind of idea of non-gendered like objects or anything like that. And he is open and he is completely open with what he's trying to do. It's amazing. And I have to say as well, he didn't fail at anything because he wasn't scared of failing at anything. Like there's a clip of him in The Elephant Man, which he played on Broadway. And honestly, no, I wasn't not worried is the wrong word, but I was like, oh, I wonder if he's as good an actor. Of course, we've seen him on screen, but Broadway, a stage is a whole different thing. And that one clip of him in Elephant Man, I was just like, oh my god, it's amazing. He's incredible.
Hmm.
Like at stage performance too, with this
I think
inflected voice to show the distortion of his face. Just amazing.
I think that comes the movie makes clear, and I think we all sort of knew, but the movie very much makes clear that this is a man who poured every ounce of his being into his creative output. And
Mhm,
I don't think it's a surprise that he turned out to be good at everything he poured that creative output into.
mhm,
I mean, we're also talking about a guy who, he died in 2016. He died 2 days after his last album came out, Black Star, which is frankly an amazing album.
mhm,
And it's even more amazing when you realize that. So we found out that he died, and we found out that he had cancer on the same day after the
mhm,
album came out, and it became like, and if you were like me and you listened to that album on the day it came out, and then you listened to it the day after you found out that he just died of cancer and must have known he had cancer for a
mhm,
long time, and you realize that he had cancer and he used that to make his last album. He poured every ounce of his experience of knowing his own mortality into making that album. That album becomes even more amazing than it already is.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like this movie made clear that that is how he lived his whole life, not
Mm-hmm.
just that section of it, right? Like
Yeah, I
whether
love
we're
that.
talking about Ziggy Stardust or his upbeat 80s pop era, he poured his
Yeah,
entire being into everything he did. And
yeah.
it's definitely something to admire and that definitely I wish more people in the world had the freedom to do.
And you get so used to these older artists. Like he said, he knows a number of these older artists who have been in the game a long time, who are bitter, who are tired, they don't want to do it anymore. And he just said, "I've just had a great life. I've been so lucky to do whatever I want, and I love life, and I've loved being alive." And it's just so refreshing to hear that, because you do. There is that stereotype of the artist must be tortured, you must be miserable to write, and he talked about that a little bit as well. And then he discovered different ways to write, and it's incredibly inspiring that the story of where he allowed himself to fail. He allowed himself to find creativity and not be limited by what people want or even what he wants. And just the idea of going into a studio and swapping all the instrument parts around because you just want a different way to write is just incredible to me. Just the It blew me away, the whole thing. I mean, this is my film of the year. In a in a year
Interesting.
that's had in a year that's had Prey and Everything Everywhere and Turning Red, and like this has been a great year for film, and this is my best out of all of them so far. It's just as a medium as well as an expression in the medium. This is one of
Hmm.
those movies where it could only be done as a movie. Like this is an absolute pure form of this style of expression to demonstrate the creativity of someone who used a different form. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
Very moving.
So
Very, yeah.
so what are you giving it at five? Five?
I might go for a one. Yeah, this is a it's a it's a, it's a 5 stars for me. Like I I'm a musician too. I've dealt with creativity my whole life. I've dealt with the limits of that and the self doubt that comes with it. And of course, this is going to be a 5 for me. I mean, it just vibrated through me from beginning to end. It was incredible. I can't wait to um, own it so I can watch it multiple times. I want to show it to my kids as well. I think it's a great thing for young creative people to see and to not be
Yeah.
afraid of doing things that other people find weird.
And to go along align with my initial comment, like if you can see this movie premiered it over the summer at a festival. It played at TIFF as of this, as of when you're listening to this. It played at TIFF like a week ago, and it came out in theaters on the this week on 16th of September. And if you can see it, I know it's playing in IMAX in certain places, and if you
Mm,
can see it on an IMAX screen, that would be
mm,
the way to see it. And if you are waiting for home video, if you if you're the type of person who's going to buy a 4K Blu-ray player, like this movie would be worth buying a
mm,
4K Blu-ray player just to own on 4K Blu-ray.
mm.
It
Yeah,
is that
visually it's
gorgeous
stunning.
from
Yeah.
start to finish.
And
So
very
for
cleverly put
me,
together.
yeah, for me, I think it's actually I'm going to say a 4 out of 5. It's not quite a
Yeah.
5 for me.
Interesting. I
Um,
see.
it is a little on the long. I felt like it didn't quite outstay its welcome, but it's a little on the long side. And I do, despite everything we've said about how important it is about his creative output, I do wish I had some more context about how his family life influenced that. Like, I feel like it was a
Mm,
little bit, maybe too laser focused. And
mm-hmm.
again, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I'm definitely in the minority on this one as well. Um, in that I think it's really, really great and not fantastic. So do with
That's
that
fair.
information what you will.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And I've been a lot more selective with my 5 stars in the last couple of years. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely the best documentary I've seen all year, and I've also seen Interestingly, there'll be at least 2 documentaries on my best of the year this list this year, probably. So,
What's the other one?
Fire of Love, which is just wonderful.
Oh, you saw that, did you?
Yeah, I saw it at Hot Docs back in the spring.
Oh, it looks very. I saw a trailer when I went to Rio to watch Mad Max. It looks very good.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Anyway, well, I think we're gonna wrap it up there.
Yes. Go
Yeah,
watch
thank
Moonage
you.
Daydream.
Yeah, go watch Moonage Daydream, and if you happen to see blank on a streaming service and there's nothing else to do, maybe give it a go. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's it for now. So join us next week. I don't 100% know what we're talking about next week, but we will be talking about Andor for sure next week, which we cannot talk about, but we can say that we have seen the first few episodes of already, and we're excited to talk about it. We, of course, record this here in Vancouver on the unceded lands of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. We would like to thank you so much for listening. We appreciate each and every one of you who has tuned in. And it seems like there's maybe a few more of you this week. So welcome, and I hope you stay. If you'd like to support us, the best thing you can do is give us a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice, and make sure to smash that like button and subscribe and all the YouTube jargon. Or if you'd like to support us a little more directly, we do, of course, have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, both of which are linked in the show notes. And that's all from us. Thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this awesome Friday.
Bye.